The mask of the villain from this 1978 horror classic was made from a Star Trek costume. That story and more next. Hi everyone, welcome to RetroFlix. This is your channel for retrospectives on movies and television. Happy Halloween. Today is Halloween, so we're going to actually have a Halloween movie today that we're going to do, and I'm going to go right into it. Today we are going to be doing the movie Halloween from 1978. This movie was an American independent film. It was a slasher horror type film. It was directed by John Carpenter, and Carpenter also created the music, and he co-wrote it with Deborah Hill, who was his girlfriend at the time. And the Halloween is today still in the culture of our country, of our pop culture. There was I know somebody had talked about seeing somebody on one of the social media platforms and was wearing a Michael Myers mask, which we'll talk about later, and was going around scaring people. This movie is 1978. Today's 2023, and it shows right there. It's still in our pop culture today. People are still looking at the mask and how scary it is, and the music and so forth like that for the movie. It just was groundbreaking, and we'll talk more about that later. In this movie, the plot basically centers around a mental patient named Michael Myers. And Michael Myers was committed to an insane asylum for murdering his teenage sister on Halloween night when he was a child. And so this fast forwards 15 years later, and he escapes and returns to his hometown. And his hometown is basically, this movie is set in a small town called Haddonfield, Illinois. And so Michael goes back to that hometown, and then he's basically now stalking a teenage babysitter by name of Laurie Strode and her friends. All the while being pursued by his psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis, to try to wrangle him in, knowing what he is going to do. So that's basically a synopsis of the movie Halloween. The cast in this was Dr. Loomis as Donald Pleasence. Donald Pleasence was the most veteran actor in this. The budget, we'll talk about that later, was really low, so they didn't have money to pay for A-list actors at the time. And so Donald Pleasence was really the most well-known and veteran actor there that would do this role. And he was paid $20,000 for it, which in 1978 is pretty handsome payday. And he actually wasn't going to do the role, but he took it because his daughter had liked a John Carpenter movie called Assault on Precinct 13, which was done previously. His daughter really liked the Carpenter score in that, and said, "Yeah, that's a really good. Maybe you ought to think about doing that. I really liked the movie, really liked the score. He seemed like he's pretty good." So Donald Pleasence took the role. Then obviously the other main one was Laurie Strode, who we mentioned in the synopsis of this, playing the babysitter that Michael Myers is really going to fixate on, and it's going to be played by a very unknown Jamie Lee Curtis. Now, for Laurie Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis was not the first choice, but they couldn't get that worked out with other actresses they wanted. So Jamie Lee Curtis was brought to their attention. Now, Jamie Lee Curtis was doing a little bit of TV at the time, but John Carpenter himself said, "I didn't watch television. I had no idea who she was." But yeah, she was still really unknown at that time. So they brought her in, and John Carpenter wasn't that thrilled about it. But then when everybody else, all the other actresses are dropping off of this role, he actually ended up finding out that Jamie Lee Curtis is the daughter of Janet Leigh, who was a star in Psycho, which at that time was, when it came to a horror, suspense, thrillers, was really looked at that time as being so influential when making that type of movie. So Carpenter found out that she was a daughter of Janet Leigh, and so he was like, "Boy, that would be great. That would be great publicity, though, to have the daughter of Janet Leigh from Psycho in this movie." And so Jamie Lee Curtis got the role. and she was paid about $8,000 for this role. Now, the other person obviously is Michael Myers, who's also called The Shape. And so you have The Shape or the masked Michael Myers. Okay, you'll see a Michael Myers that's unmasked at the end, but the masked Michael Myers that we know is also called The Shape, and it's actually like that in the credits. The masked Michael Myers or The Shape is played by Nick Castle. And Nick Castle knew John Carpenter through his ties with him when they both went to the University of Southern California and stayed friends. And Carpenter brought him in to play that role. Now there's the unmasked at the end. That actually was played by Tony Moran, who is actually the brother of Aaron Moran, who played Joni in the sitcom Happy Days. And so that kind of rounds out the few main characters in this. The filming took place around Hollywood and the Hollywood Hills, and in the surrounding areas is where they filmed this. It was filmed between a 4-week period in May 1978. And again, as I talked about, the budget was really low, about $300,000, which even in 1978 was a low budget for a movie. And so a lot of the actors wore their own clothes. And Jamie Lee Curtis's wardrobe in that movie actually was bought at JCPenney's for $100. So, at least being a main character, she had hers bought, where everybody else pretty much had to bring their own clothes from home. And of course, then obviously, you look at the budget, and that speaks to what we talked about before as far as the actors go and what they were getting paid. Actually not chump change in 1978, but still weren't able to get the actors, the name actors and so forth, who made a lot more than that either. So the budget had to be brought down. And really interesting here, talking about our intro, the Michael Myers mask, which is, I talked about that fellow on social media was trying to scare people, and he was wearing a Michael Myers mask, scaring people. He would just pull up in a car and look over at a Michael Myers mask and scare people with it. So that's obviously very iconic because of how scary that character was with that mask. That mask actually, again, a low budget and so forth, that mask was bought at a costume store in Hollywood. And in the costume store, they actually found a Captain Kirk costume, Captain Kirk from Star Trek. So they found that costume and then used the Captain Kirk mask. And the production designers on the movie then just took that mask and then shaped it into what you see on in the movie. So what they did was basically they took that mask and they widened the eyes and they painted the flesh like a pale blue type of flesh to give just this blank stare, human, or some people will think inhuman, sort of look that gave Michael Myers with that mask. Also, while filming this movie, John Carpenter, to try to aid the actors and what he was looking for as far as terror from them, he made what was called a fear meter, and it went up to 10. And so, for example, he was looking for a fear meter of how he wanted to see the terror in their faces, when doing a scene. And so he would basically say, well, this is. When you make a face, when you're terrified, this is a 6, this is a 7. Tonight, though, when we shoot, I want a 9. So using those baselines of this being a 6 and 7, and I want a 9, the actors could know, how much they had to put into their scream or their face or whatever for terror, which I thought was really interesting to do. So we talk about the score of this movie as well. Carpenter did all that himself, primarily because when they finished the movie and they did a test screen of it, the audience didn't find it very, very scary. So we thought, well, the music can make a big difference in it, which it did, and it's very very iconic, without question. But that was all Carpenter. He said a keyboard, and he did all that. He even said, I could play any keyboard. He goes, I can't read or write music, but I can sit down and I can make music from a keyboard. And that's what he did with the score of this movie. When it was all said and done, again, it was about $300,000 budget for this movie. It ended up bringing in $70 million, which at the time and still is one of the most profitable independent films of all time. And the legacy of this, we just talked about that, the guy on social media going around scaring people with a Michael Myers mask, even today in 2023. So you look at the legacy of this, parodies that are on certain shows and that sort of thing. It was inspired by, Psycho, which we talked about with Jamie Lee Curtis's mom, Janet Leigh, was in, by Alfred Hitchcock. And also, too, if you look at holiday theme, too, this is one of the first holiday themed, and I think, then you started to see through the 80s and so forth, some of these holiday themed type of slasher horror movies, that Halloween really then kickstarted that, because there was one in 1974 called Black Christmas by Bob Clark, who that was an inspiration to Halloween, but not a lot of people know about that movie. It's kind of lost, and so so from the 80s and on, everybody kind of looked at Halloween, which there's no doubt for good reason. Halloween really became the blueprint for the slasher horror movies throughout the 80s and even the 90s and 2000s, and probably even today for that matter. You look at Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream, all of those were influenced heavily by Halloween. There's no question about it. And Halloween also popularized, when the filming of it, popularized scenes from the perspective of the killer. And to make it even more intriguing and more scary, for that matter. And there was also, there's been probably around a dozen sequels to Halloween. There is actually an Atari video game. I did not know this, and I came from that era. I had Atari through and through. I am that age of Atari, late 70s, early 80s. It had all the video games and so forth, and I do not remember this video game at all. And it was actually brought out in 1983. Didn't have any of the name. It didn't name any characters in it. They did. Obviously, this was very low budget. You'd have to pay for that sort of thing. So there were no characters named in it, but just a killer going around trying to slash people, I guess, in the video. Like I said, I don't know anything about it. I never heard of it, and I was just doing research on it, and I saw this, and it kind of floored me. I think I've heard most, if not all, Atari video games growing up as a kid then, and how huge it was. I never heard of this. But interestingly enough, because they were trying to make this so cheap, evidently the label to the cartridge was actually just a blank label, or it was just a piece of tape. It was a piece of tape, and they just wrote Halloween on it with black marker as the label for the cartridge. That just blew me away. I never heard that. So interesting. In 2006, it was selected for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry by a Library of Congress. So again, you want to look at a legacy of a film. When they get that, they have it. Where can you see this movie now? So if you haven't watched it already, Halloween, but today's Halloween day, but I know people celebrate it, coming off the weekend, people got trick-or-treating and go out and so forth, like on the weekend, not actually on the day of Halloween. But if you're still in that mood and want to watch stuff on that day of Halloween and want to watch this movie, you can get this in a multitude of places. For free, you can get it on Plex. I think you can get it on Redbox. You can get it on, there's a place called Free Movie. You can get it on as well. And you can also get it on, again, I mentioned this before, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it's Fossum, I believe. And you can also, if you have Sling or Philo, it's on there. There's also an app called Shudder that has it. It's on Prime Video. You know, so it's a lot of places. If you have a Roku, all you do is put a search in. There's so many places you can see this movie. So I say, if you've seen it before, go and watch it again. If you haven't seen this before and you want to be scared, I mean, this is just, I know I'm being biased, but it's just, you go back 70s and 80s, I think those movies are still the scariest movies. And I hope you enjoyed the Halloween edition of Retro Flicks today. And again, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And comment. I really appreciate it if you do that as well and have a dialogue together. So until next time, that's a wrap.